Hello and welcome back to my channel, Logically Literate. This is the fourth video in the 5-part series of making a Python web server using Flask and SQLalchemy. In this video we're going to look at using SQLalchemy specifically to save data from a list and then show that list of data on the website. We will also add in the ability to delete list items. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. In the previous video, we created this page here that when different data was typed in and submitted, it would change the text here. Now this was only changing the global variable in the file public.py. So now what we're going to do is we're going to leave this, but we're also going to add in a new page that shows a list of data. And that list of data will be stored in a database such that when the server is restarted, the data persists. So to do that, we're first going to need to have an endpoint for our list view. So we'll start off by creating a new route, and we'll call this one /list. And again, the function name can be whatever you want. As long as the decorator is on top of it, it will hit that when that endpoint -list is called. So the first thing we're going to do is, again, read in our data, because this will be both a initial view endpoint as well as a submit new data and see new things endpoint. So to do that, I'll go ahead and just copy this here and reuse that. But we're going to change this to item name. Then I'm going to say if temp data, we're going to do some things. But for now, we'll pass on that. And then we're going to need to query for items, and we'll say items equals something. We'll just leave that for now. And then I will say return render template, and the name of this template will be listview.html, and list items will be what we pass in, and this will be items. So before we can do anything here with querying in the database, we'll actually need to set that up. So let's go ahead over here, and for starters, we're going to create the DB instance. So we'll say from Flask SQLalchemy import SQLalchemy, and then we're just going to say DB equals SQLalchemy. And notice this is inside of the init file of the database. Next, we're going to create a list entry.py file, and we'll want to say from database import DB. That was that DB we just created. So now we want to create a list entry class, and it will inherit from the db.model class. Whenever you are creating SQLalchemy tables, like we're doing now, you'll want to inherit from the DB model. That way, later on, when we go to actually create the database, it will go through and it will know all of the tables you've created, and it will create them in the database. So every table will need a table name. So we'll go ahead and create a table name attribute, and we'll just call this list entry. And I like to make my table names have plural names, so I call it list entries. Next up, we'll want to create a ID, because every row in a SQL database needs to have a primary key. So this will be a primary key equals true. And then we'll have a title for the actual thing we're going to be showing in the list. And that'll be of type string. So these guys will actually be, I'm hitting Alt-Enter, and I'm getting this pop-up, and I say import name. I want to import the SQLalchemy column type, and then I'll do Alt-Enter again, import name, SQLalchemy integer type, and then lastly on the string, Alt-Enter, import name, SQLalchemy string. Okay, so now we have our table. Our table will have two columns, one will be ID and one will be title. And then from there we can go ahead and start filling out the rest of our list endpoint. So now we want to convert this to a more clean title. So we'll go ahead and cast it to a string, and then we'll want to say .strip, and this will remove white spaces from either side. Next, we'll want to query for any existing entries in our database of this type list entry. Again, Alt-Enter, and we can import that automatically. And over here with DB, we'll Alt-Enter and we'll import database. So database and list entry are both two things that we created. We'll want to filter off of the list entry .title, and we'll want to set that equal to title, or we'll want to filter based off of it being equal to title, and we'll want to pull the first record. So now if there is something that has this title in our database, it will come out as existing, and then what we'll want to do is say if existing, we want to db.session.delete that item. So we're going to delete existing, but if it doesn't exist, we'll want to actually save it. So I want to say new item, new item equals list entry title equals title. And then we'll want to say db.session.add new item. Now, to actually put that into the database, we'll want to say db.session.commit, and this will actually write to the database. So now we have items written to our database, and we have items being removed from our database. This commit will also be needing, you will also need to include this commit after the delete line to actually cause the SQL to be sent to the database. Next, we'll want to actually query, and this looks very similar to what we've already done. We'll want to query for all of our list entries, and to get all of them, we just say simply .all. And so now items is a list of list entries. So now we have our render template with a list view, which we do not have yet. So let's go ahead and create that next. So we'll just say new HTML file, and we'll call it list view. Okay, and we'll want to just get rid of that. List view will look a lot like home, so I'll actually just copy and paste. Put that in the wrong file there, wrong folder. So we'll copy and paste home into list view, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete. We'll delete this, and I'm just going to copy in some code here. And this is, so this right here, get the formatting to be similar. Okay, so this right here will have a heading of your list, and then we're going to use Jinja to do a for loop. So for item in list items. This is the thing we passed in here, list items. For item, print out a bullet, and then say item title using the Jinja templating, item.title. So this is the Python object item, or list entry item, and then say .title. So .title will get us into the list entry's title attribute, and then that'll print out, and we'll do a break so we have new lines after each one. And so we'll go over the list and we'll iterate and we'll print out each one. And then if we want to add some new ones, we have our form here, which is our new paragraph form, but we'll actually call it add new item. And we'll get rid of the value because we don't want the value to be there, and we'll just say placeholder, and we'll say item name. And new text will be changed to item name because that is the variable that we are filtering on here. One more thing, we need to add some database stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this in for time's sake. We'll also need to Alt-Enter on OS, and we'll need to import just the base OS class. So right here, this line will create an SQLite database stored in the database folder here called tutorial.db. And then this tells the Flask app where to find the database file, and then this just tells it to track the modifications to the database. And here we'll want to also import the database from database folder. And what this does is we'll actually init the database, and what initting a database does is it'll actually create all the tables. So if you notice when I hit save here, it runs through, and because we have debug mode set to true here, we'll get the SQLalchemy echo, so you'll see the actual SQL text being printed out. You'll notice here it creates the table after it checks for the table to see if it exists. It creates the table, and now we're ready to go. So if we open up a browser, we reload this page, we'll need to add one more thing first. So to our navbar.html, we're going to add a list page. So this will actually make our endpoint available to us. We can switch to it. So now, if we go here, we reload this page, we'll now have a list tab here. So if we click on this, it'll take us to our list, and we can add in. So one more thing, inside of here we need to actually change the redirect from being the based endpoint to being the list endpoint. So now, if we come back here, we reload this page, we can type in 1, and when we hit submit, it adds to our list. And if we say 2, it adds to our list. If we say 2 again, it removes 2 from the list. And if we say 1 again, it removes 1 from the list. And you can really say anything you want and save it to the list. And if you want to just delete it, you just have to paste it back in, and it'll delete it from the list. You could make it to where you have buttons next to it, and when you click X, it'll submit, similar to this form here, it'll submit a field called item name with the list endpoint, and it'll delete it for you, but it's much easier just for time's sake to just type it back in and delete it. Okay, so what we're really trying to show here is that the data is persistent between restarts of the database. So you notice I have 1 and 2 in here right now. If I restart this database, it fails to load. Okay, so for some reason PyCharms isn't liking something, but I've got it running here now in the Anaconda prompt instead of in PyCharms. So again, like I was saying, if you rerun it, go ahead and go to the base page. So now when we load up the list, we should see the 2. So we do. So now if I add another item and I say submit, now we have it on the list. You saw it come into here. And if I kill that and I reload this just to show that it's not there anymore, okay, it's gone, right? The base server was cached, but now it's not there anymore. So now if I run this again and I reload this page, cool, we're back. If I go to the list, you see the 3 entries there again. And you can remove them one by one, just like that. Okay, so in the past videos, I've shown you how to start up a Flask server, do some HTML with Jinja, and in this video I showed you how to save items to a database. In the next video, we'll go ahead and talk about a few external APIs that may be interesting to use, as well as maybe some project ideas or applications of this. Additionally, I will introduce the idea of creating a Python API server and not so much using the HTML stuff here, because I don't think it's as good as it should be, but rather relying on something like Angular.js or something like that to build your front end, and then use Python as your back end, because there are some really good libraries that make it very strong in that sense. But until then, thanks for watching and have a nice day.